Hello, hello, and welcome to Practitioner Tuesday training. I am very excited to see you all here. Oh, hello, Nan and Joshua and Marina. I haven't seen your name before. Welcome, Lori. I'm so glad you're here. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday training for practitioners. We have a very exciting topic for today. Nothing new, but always new. We're going to continue to dive into sacrum today. Hey, Lori, good to see you. Good morning.
Hello.
That's right. It is morning where you are, Joshua. I'm glad that you're here. Hello, hello. And for those of you who are just coming in, you might have been getting your audio set up. I want to make sure you heard me say hello. Nan is still getting her audio set up, which is great. Marina, I'm glad that you're here. Yeah, we have been talking sacrum for the last couple weeks here in Tuesday training, which I'm excited about. And we're also just at the starting point of our Sacred Sacrum course, which has been very fun. Natasha's about to join us. Hey, Natasha, glad you're here. I don't know if she can even hear me yet. And so one of the things that came up in our training last week in our live Sacred Sacrum training course was the architecture of the sacrum and the joints and the bones and where it sits and how it's significant. Hey, Natasha, glad that you're here. And then there were some questions that came up after that training. And I thought, well, if it came up in our live course, it's probably here in the multiverse too, out here on YouTube. So there's something that I want to share with you guys today about the joint structures and the functionality of them when it comes to the sacrum and the pelvis. I think this is important for us to know. So we're going to dive into that today. Definitely let me know if you have any questions along the way. They don't have to be sacrum related. I'm just going to dive in with that information today because we get to have it. And if you're joining us for the first time, I'm so glad to have you. Thank you for being here and joining us. I'm your host for the hour. I've been a manual and movement practitioner for over 31 years at this point. And so as I work sacrum centric in my practice with clients, and our method, the SHOTS method, is sacrum centric, this is definitely in my wheelhouse to be sharing with you today. So I'm super excited to give you a little more juice on the topic. I will start us off by saying anything that I share with you today about how I work or how, clinically this is effective or this, that, or the other. Nothing that I'm sharing with you guys today is a claim or a treatment plan. It may or may not apply to your specific client that you're thinking about as we're talking today. So please, use the information wisely and smartly, and don't be puppets and robots and just follow what I did and then hope it works. Hope's not a treatment plan. We know this. So just want to make sure that we say that. And if you do have specific client questions, of course, ask me them, and I'll do my very best to sort it out with you. Although I don't answer client questions online. I'm not in the room with the person. So I can't even answer my own client questions if I'm not in the room with them. I have hunches and I have things to explore. And I'm happy to do both of those with you. So just want to let you know, if you're joining us for the first time, that's sort of where the Q&A parameters are. But other than that, all questions are open. Also want to let you guys know, I probably should just send this in an email. You guys probably can tell Zoom did a thing again. And so the few hundred of you that are registered for Tuesday trainings on Zoom, we don't have those registrations anymore. So if you had to log on today and re-register yourself, sorry about that. And if you were expecting to get a reminder from Zoom today, like we send out every week, and now you're watching on the replay going, how come you didn't send me an email? We don't have them. So I just want to let you know that that's just part of the world of tech. And I'm glad for those of you who are here with us. We love having you. So I think Perry, you dropped in as well in the background. Nice to have you, Terry, Natasha, Marina, Larry, Josh. Okay, great. I got everybody for today. All right, my friends. So we're going to walk through the joints of the pelvis specific to the sacrum. For those of you who are in our sacrum course, this will be a great review. It'll also be a heads up on what we're doing tomorrow in our workshopping. So each week in our sacrum course, if you guys are interested in sacrum, you got to be in this course. Each week we're going over anatomy and functional anatomy. And then the following week, we're actually workshopping it out. So you're learning the how-to. I know several of you have sent me emails. Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? Is it too late for me to join? It's not too late for you to join, but get in there because we have workshopping coming up tomorrow. Hey, Cheryl, good to see you. And what happened in between our last week and our workshopping that's coming up tomorrow is a study group. And a little birdie told me, Lori, who ran our study group this week, thank you so much for that. I heard that it was great and that you guys covered lots of Q&A, and I got to hear what were the questions that were left from our training. There's no problem if there's questions, guys. We're not designed to hear everything. We're just not even, so think about that. Like even in a conversation with your loved one, you think you're listening, but you didn't really hear everything that they said. We're not wired for that, which is part of how like misunderstandings come about, and you're not listening to me, and all the things that we do and say to each other. But just keep in mind as you're talking to somebody, whether it's a learning environment like here, casual on a Tuesday, or, committed on a Wednesday for the course, or just at dinner with someone you care about, you're not hearing everything. Neither are they. So like, let's just use our physiology for our own wisdom and give each other some grace. Ask questions. Ask it 3 freaking times if you have to ask it 3 times until you get the answer that you deserve and want. Fine. And if you're being asked a question 3 times, just answer it. Doesn't mean that they're not listening. They didn't hear you. They literally can only hear 20% of what you're saying. So I love it. All that to say, I love it when I hear, what are the questions after the questions? Like, what are the questions the day after at breakfast when you're like, wait, what did she say yesterday about XYZ? I love it when those questions come up, because that lets me know that you're still looking for the answer and there's a place where I can fill in the gap for you. So I'm going to do a little bit of that today and also shine some newness on what we've covered so far. So if you've not joined us for Tuesday training, you're going to love this. If you've joined us for Tuesday training and you're in the course, then you have a heads up for tomorrow. You won't have to listen too much because those will be part of the 20% that you already remember, which is great. Moses, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. I know Rhonda's coming in as well. All right, my friends. So let's have a look at the pelvis here. This area of the body, the pelvis, we all know this. And it's called a couple things. Some people call it the pelvic bowl, and that's referring to the bones themselves, right? If you look at it, it kind of makes up a bowl. If there was a bottom to it, you could fill it up with water, right? And it would be held like a reservoir. So the bones themselves make up a pelvic bowl. You could also hear it referred to as the pelvic girdle. And pelvic girdle is the bowl, the bones themselves, and also the soft tissue and connective tissue that connect the bones and the bowl together. I've heard some people say the connective tissue that holds the bones together is part of the bowl. This is not a medical term, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. I'm just letting you know if you hear these different things and you're like, what are they actually talking about? The pelvic bowl would be the bones. The pelvic girdle includes the soft tissue, the muscles, and all the other connective tissue in this area. I've also heard it called the pelvic diaphragm, which really threw me off the first time I heard that. Anybody ever heard pelvic diaphragm? You've heard this one, Rhonda? A chiropractor actually used pelvic diaphragm, and I was like, what do you mean pelvic diaphragm? You mean like diaphragm, like muscle diaphragm, like breathing apparatus diaphragm? Like, what are you talking about? And so there are other schools of thought that describe this area and the way it functions as a pelvic diaphragm, not same as the diaphragmic muscle that we use to breathe. But interestingly enough, there's also an occipital diaphragm. So I sort of filed that, the pelvic diaphragm and the occipital diaphragm, I filed that into the land of chiropractic, mostly because it confused me back in the day. And also, I already had these other 2 terms. I already had pelvic bowl, and I already had, now I'm going to say pelvic diaphragm again. What did I say?
Girdle, the girdle.
Oh, girdle. Thank you. Yeah. Using myself on my own terms. See, this is why I set it aside. So if you're hearing these terms, use the ones that work for you. Use the ones that work for you. I always recommend that you use anatomical terms as they were called medically, meaning like if you could find them in a medical terminology book, or if you could find them in an A&P book, anatomy and physiology book, I recommend using those before any shorthanded concoctions that you or another body worker might come up with. No problem with that, by the way, but they don't all translate. right? Like what chiropractors say doesn't always translate to what a body worker says, doesn't always translate to what a podiatrist says, right? So, because we learn different parts for different reasons. So use the ones that have an anatomical basis to them so that you don't freak yourself out and get confused like you just saw me do, which is why I don't use the diaphragm one. It didn't land for me. It was kind of confusing, but I do use pelvic bowl when I'm talking anatomy, meaning structure, bones. And I do use pelvic girdle when I'm talking about the functionality of all the soft tissue in that area. So that's how I use it. And then we get into like the actual anatomical terms of what are those structures called. So let's talk about the bowl first, the bones. And for some of you, this will be review. This will feel really good, like a bath to your nervous system, which is great. I'm going to take off Murph's leg because he's dragging it and pounding on the table and making noise. So now he looks like he's an amoeba, just sort of a floater. Let's talk about the bones in this area. How many bones make up the pelvic bowl, by the way? How many bones make up this area, the pelvis? How many bones? 3. Woo, there's my superstars. Which 3? Which 3? We've talked about a lot of bones, especially over Tuesday training. It articulates with that, it articulates with this, then there's this, then there's that. What are the bones that I refer to when we're talking about the pelvic area, the bowl itself? What are the bones? Go ahead, Lori. Yes, those are the ones. What are they called?
Yeah, the two, yeah, I know. Beep, burp. The sacrum, of course.
The sacrum.
Yeah, and then the two innominates or oxcoxa, whatever.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. The sacrum, 1, and then the 2 innominates, 2 and 3. So those are the 3 bones. This bone is all one bone, all one bone. So we had some question that came up in our course last week. Is it the ilium? Is it this? Is it that? This bone, this oxcoxa, this innominate, if you will, has lots of bony landmarks on it that all have a name because they're so significant. So we don't want to let that confuse us into thinking there's more bones than 3 in the pelvis. The reason we don't want to get confused isn't so that we could just be smart and like win a trivia game. It's because if we recognize how many bones are there and then we start learning the relationship between them, it'll help us keep track of what we're keeping track of and how we're designed. And then when it goes wrong, which is what we're all here to look for, Gina, what do I do for my client who has XYZ? Hold the presses. What does the anatomy tell you? We need to know the anatomy to be able to answer that question. So we really want to know that there's only 3 bones that make up the pelvis or the pelvic bowl. Is there also a relationship between L5 and S1? Yes, we talked about that. Is there also a tailbone coccyx at the bottom of the sacrum? Yes, we talked about that a few weeks ago here on Tuesday training as well. The tailbone itself is not something you'll ever align, although it is a bone that can be aligned because it's a joint and it does articulate with the sacrum. So anywhere there's 2 bones that meet, it's called an articulation, AKA joint. Anywhere that there's a joint or an articulation, there's movement. But my friends, you heard my broken tailbone story. You're not getting in there to get this bad guy. It is not. So none of us should be doing any adjusting or aligning of tailbone structures. That's definitely in the world of the chiropractors, and it should be. That's when I learned pelvic diaphragm. I was like, what do you mean my diaphragm's affecting my broken tailbone? Wait, what? And that's how that whole conversation rolled out. Are we also responsible for the axial skeleton and the L5 arrangement to the sacrum? For sure. But if we're only talking pelvis, there's 3 bones. The innominate, we've said, on the right, the innominate on the left, and then, of course, the sacrum in the back. So if there's 3 bones, how many joints are there? 3 bones of the pelvis, how many joints? Easy math, but it's confusing. Yeah, 3, exactly. So we want to know about the joints in the pelvis because that's where the movement is. Now, I've had some folks, I'm just going to pause this here. I've had some folks say, well, but what about the hip joint? Absolutely. Great question. I love it. That's where the femur meets the acetabulum. That's absolutely a joint for sure. That's in the appendicular skeleton though. When I say pelvis, I'm talking about the place where the appendicular skeleton meets the axial skeleton. It's another reason why the sacrum is so significant as a keystone structure. You guys following along on that? Looked like there were some questions that popped up on a few faces. Good? Lori?
I think where I got them a little confused is that it articulates in different spots. I have that it articulates in 4, but there's 3 joints.
Of the pelvis.
Of the pelvis, correct.
Right. So it's like a 4-3-2-1 game.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So how many bones does the sacrum articulate with? Innominate, innominate, L5, and coccyx.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, that's okay.
Mhm.
Articulates in 4 places. That's what I have. Okay.
Yeah, but how many bones are in the pelvis?
3.
3.
Uh-huh.
And I get it. There's questions about the tailbone. I get it. I'm just telling you guys how I sort it out. I get it. You could be like, well, isn't the tailbone in the pelvis? Yeah, but I can't adjust the tailbone. But I can manhandle the sacrum and do great things with that. Okay. And then there's other articulations in this area that aren't specific to the pelvis, L5 being one of them, the femoral head being another in the acetabulum. But we're not counting the femur as part of the pelvis, even though it articulates with the pelvis. We're counting that as part of the appendicular skeleton. Does this make sense to you guys? Is this becoming more clear? This was the question that I heard from study groups, so I want to make sure that I land it clearly. It should be, should. I don't mean to should on you guys. Here's my wish. My wish is that you know the anatomy so clearly by the time I'm done pouring into you, that I can go, how many bones are this? How many bones make up that arrangement? How many bones, if you put this and this together, how many are there? And then what are the joints between them? My wish is for you to be able to interchange them enough because you know the parts so well. So I want to keep talking to you about this until you're clear like that. That's why I'm bringing it up again today before our workshopping tomorrow in Sacred Sacrum and since our training last week. So let's walk through it again. Rhonda, you have a question? You can come off mute. What's your question?
So I missed a few minutes. Maybe you've covered this, but
That's all right.
In talking about the tailbone attaches to pelvic floor muscles, yes?
Yes.
So then is that part of our purview?
Pelvic girdle, we're on pelvic bowl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not even on soft tissue yet. We're just on bones.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
We're on bones and joints that move, that we affect by how we instruct movement and by what we treat when movement creates pain.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a layering there for sure. We're going to do soft tissue for the sacrum in our Sacred Sacrum course next week. So we're workshopping this week on just the architecture of the sacrum in the pelvis and how that's all aligned. So we're working on alignment practices in our workshopping tomorrow. Then we're going to move on to soft tissue, and the layering gets very fun then because then we're into symptoms and all kinds of other things too. Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's walk through it one more time because this time it should be review and your brain should be like, oh, that was so easy. I got it this time. Okay, great. 3 bones. Trying to get Murph's arms up in here. He doesn't, I think I'm the reason why he doesn't have hands anymore because I used to shove his hands up in his ribs and make him like use his ribs like pockets. And I think I'm the reason. But it looks really awful when his arms are just hanging down. There's no hands on him, doesn't it? It's just no, Gary, you don't mind it? Okay, good. I feel good about that. All right. He'd never be a body worker, right? Okay. It's like the shoemaker's kids don't have shoes. The body worker's skeleton kid doesn't have hands. This is not good. Okay. So pelvic bowl, the pelvis, 3 bones to think about, to consider, to make sure that you're responsible for, that they are aligned for the happiness of the sacrum. That is the sacrum, and each innominate on either side. The innominates go all the way to the front. We're going to come back and talk joints in a minute. Those 3 bones fit together like Lego blocks. Click, click, click. They literally fit that way by structural design. It's gorgeous. The sacrum also, though, articulates to and is affected by and affects L5, bone just above it. Also articulates with the coccyx. We talked about that at length a couple weeks back. And the tailbone being the navigator, like the sail, the North Star on the ship, right? And the innominates, not the sacrum, also articulate with the femur, the legs. So we know there's a relationship between the legs and the sacrum because of their, second place connection, if you will. Leg, extremity, innominate to sacrum. We know there's a connection. You can see it. One joint affects the other joint for sure. But if you're just talking pelvis, you don't want to get too ahead of yourself and go all the way from the sacrum down to the big toe without first just checking the Lego blocks. Just check these Lego blocks, save a lot of time. Save a lot of time. The reason why that is not because the foot doesn't have significance to the sacrum. It absolutely does. We talk about feet a lot in the Schatz method. It's for expediency. And the reason you can make it expedited to focus on these 3 Lego blocks is because of the sacrum itself. Being the keystone, how it's designed, its relationship to the innominates, and the juncture between the axial and appendicular skeleton. That's how I figured it out. I use the anatomy to let me know what has more of an impact on the body, the sacrum and how it's situated, or the big toe. It's pretty easy, right? So, and I'm not being cheeky about it. I'm like, that's how you figure it out, guys. Everything matters. Everything matters in the body. When I'm in conversation with you all and you're talking about client work and what do I do and what about this and what about that, I get lit up because you're considering everything, and there's nothing here that's superfluous. It's all majestic and phenomenal. Yes, for the win. Yes, for that. But if we're trying to create results and we only have 60 minutes, I don't want you to spend too much time exploring. It's like, just figure out what you need to do, go get it done, and then you can be back into the majestic land of awesomeness after the session's over and not squirrel out too long in that 60 minutes. So yes, explore how the big toe has an effect on the sacrum. We absolutely do that, like I said. But first, check these Lego blocks. If you have a 60-minute session with someone, or 75 minutes, or 90, or 30, whatever your time frame is, I'm telling you, the relationship between those 3 Lego blocks matters way higher on the list than the big toe mound. It just does. Doesn't mean the big toe mound doesn't. It just means these matter first. That's what it means. Okay, so order of hierarchy, like check, check, check. Okay, for those of you who like checklists, that would be the checklist, the order of hierarchy. Use that if you want a checklist. There's no other matrix checklist for injury and pain. Okay, so we're clear. 3 bones in the pelvis. What are the 3 joints then in the pelvis? Because that's where the movement's happening. That's where the relationship is between those bones. Rhonda?
The pubic symphysis and the 2 SI joints.
The 2 SI joints, exactly. 3 bones, 3 joints in the pelvis. You want to look at those first. If you're putting a treatment plan together, you want to look at those first. What do you look at? You look at where they're supposed to be when they're aligned. That's why we're doing alignment practices tomorrow in class. Where are they supposed to be when they're aligned? What's the effect of the movement of those joints? Am I witnessing that in my client, or has that movement been impeded in some way in that joint, which would then have a rollout effect a laundry list as long as your femur on muscles that would be affected by that. If joints aren't aligned, and I feel like I'm doing all negatives. If they're not this and they're not that, just hang with me though. If joints aren't aligned, their articulation, their function is off, and every muscle involved in that joint's action is now unhappy. They may also all be symptomatic. So you could think to yourself, oh my gosh, there's so many muscles I have to address in this body. And I'm appealing to you to go back to those 3 bones and just figure out where they are in relationship to each other. And the muscles won't be unhappy. So that's the treatment. That's the plan, if you will. I can't teach you how to do that on a Tuesday training. If I could teach it in an hour, many more of you would be SHOTS method practitioners. It takes a minute. And it's also what we do in our training track. But you probably already have practices that you use. And so, use what you have, and if they work, great. And if not, come back and we'll teach you how. However, you still want to think about the relationship of these 3 bones, even when muscles are screaming. Muscles are going to give you the feedback. The bone's not going to give you the feedback. Doesn't mean the bone shouldn't be looked at. We know this. This came up in one of the questions, I think, at the study group, if I heard correctly. Well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And what about that? What about it? 90% of the pain in the body is referred from somewhere else. If you keep insisting on focusing on the pain that someone's come in with and the spot that they're pointing at and the tender spot that you got to give a response out of their body, you're probably just affecting symptoms. If you want to look at how to resolve the genesis of pain, I'm telling you, point your nostrils back towards the sacrum and sniff it out there. Well, that kind of was gross, but look at the sacrum, because that's the genesis 90% of the time. Just like pain is referred 90% of the time, the sacrum is the keystone. So rather than confirming oh yeah, this muscle's tender and that muscle's sore and this tendon's inflamed and that, yeah, I'm sure it is. If the keystone's off, I'm sure all of those soft tissues are affected. And again, for those of you who are in sacred sacrum, as we layer on the soft tissue, you'll start to see oh yeah, I guess I could have, I probably have spent a little bit of time there and I could have pieced that together. We're starting with the bones first for a reason. Not only is it the foundation and the way things were built, but it's also where you're going to get the most, result. I promise you that. Okay, so then that takes us to, and we'll wrap our functional anatomy up today with this idea. Now that we know the bones in the pelvis and the joints in the pelvis, how do these joints move? How does that joint move? That's pubic symphysis. It's almost it almost looks like a disc in the spine. How does that joint move? If we know it's a joint and we know that there's movement there, and we know that we need to look at whether or not it's aligned and happy, how does it move? Rhonda?
It can twist in a torque, and it can compress toward each other.
How does it move when it's supposed to be working? So I love that you went into when it goes wrong, but what's the actual functional, purpose of that joint?
Well, it does torque. It moves. It's a twist with each step of the leg.
It's a twist this way?
No, toward the ground. One side of the pelvis will twist down.
Okay. And I'm just going to, maybe you like the word twist. For me, twisting and twerking means something's off.
Okay.
So there's not that much movement. There is movement, and it's exactly as you're describing it, but it's not like the pelvis is twisting,
not that big, no.
Twisting, right?
Right.
But if it does, that's a problem. That's when it goes wrong. So typically what happens when things are going wrong and your people are presenting with pain, it's something that was supposed to be there, got a little haywire, or something that was supposed to be there got impeded from being able to do the little bit that it's supposed to do. And a little bit goes a long way, right? So we want to know how is it designed to work? And Why does it work that way? And I'm going to come back and ask you that question, Rhonda. So I'm not going to hold Murph. Well, I'll hold him up for one, and then I'll take him down. So this innominate, just at the pubic symphysis, does a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Okay. And the other one does the same thing alternately and simultaneously. So the two innominates together at the pubic symphysis do, 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 do. Okay. Now, my hands here, let's call this the SI joint. Picture in your mind's eye, guys. If the pubic symphysis is doing this, what's the SI joint doing?
Gliding up and down.
The same. It's doing literally the same. It has to, because now we know there's only one bone on the side of the sacrum and one bone on the other side of the sacrum. If you don't know that and you get confused by how many bones are in the sacrum, you don't really, or in the pelvis, you don't really know how they're working and affecting the sacrum. But now you can see it because you know the bones. This is exciting. You're using the anatomy to support you. And like, well, how does that joint actually move? So there's a little bit of in the innominates, meant to be that way for things like walking. And what do you, Rhonda, I'm going to call back on you. What do you make of the size of the pubic symphysis? Why does it need to be this size?
Shock absorption.
Yes, because our legs, this is now again where our legs are connected to our pelvis and then our sacrum. We're pounding on the earth. And we were designed that way, guys, before we ever had asphalt or like pavers, right? Like we made pavers, but the earth was here before we were. So, or we all came at the same time, or whatever you believe. We were designed to walk, and we have that gigantic piece of shock absorption right in the front of our pelvis, because this is meant to happen, and our legs are meant to articulate with the earth. We know this. We follow the design. It'll tell you that. Okay, cool. Some people are like, so do you believe that we weren't supposed to walk on our arms and legs? I don't know. My legs are a lot longer than my arms. I would have looked like a pterodactyl. Isn't that the dinosaur with the little arms? You couldn't really do much with. Isn't that the pterodactyl? Yeah. I think, I don't know. I don't know. I think we were designed the way we were, and upright is the way. That's not really what you came here for. And it doesn't really matter because we're all walking now on just our legs and not our arms, unless we're in yoga. So it's all good. Or what was that? What was that game in gym class when you used to have to crawl on your hands and legs? Crab something? The crab crawl? Am I dating myself? The little red balls in gym class? Yeah, I'm dating myself. All right, it's fine. It was fun though. I could get myself across the floor. Whoop. Okay. Anyway, that was my shining moment in gym class. I thought I'd boast about that. Here we have this gigantic piece of cartilage for shock absorption, which then if we're into like, okay, how does it work then? And what happens when it goes wrong? If my pelvis is designed, innominate and innominate, to just do a little shimmy, 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 shimmy as I walk, and I have a gigantic piece of cartilage here to do a lot of shock absorption, it tells me I'm designed to run, for sure. I'm designed to run and make that happen faster with more pounding. More pounding means more friction. More pounding means more friction. So now there's more friction and more pounding and more friction and more pounding. So how many of you have clients who have discomfort from running, but they walk no problem, like into your office to tell you about how their running causes them pain and injury? You guys ever notice that? You do, Joshua? Yeah, I can't tell you the number. It might have been because I worked for a runners club for a while, working on their mechanics. But it's amazing to me how many folks who are runners are like, God, I really want to get back to running. I really wish I could get back to running. Gina, please, my goal is for us to get back to running. Can I just please be running before it snows? And I think, well, it's literally the same mechanics as walking. Why can't you run? And that's the question to ask yourself. Why can't this person run without pain? If you want to start getting down the rabbit hole of their extremities, oh, it's their knee, it's their ankle, it's their big toe. Sure. I'm going to appeal to you to go back to the pelvis and what's happening in the relationship between these two innominates. Because that is happening while they are both walking and running. There's just more impact as they pound the earth when they run than they do when they walk, but the mechanics functionally are the same. So if one of those causes pain and the other one doesn't, it doesn't mean that the other one doesn't cause pain. It just means the symptoms aren't rearing themselves yet. You still need to go look for it as the practitioner. Walking and running should be the same because the mechanics of them relative to the 3 bones we're talking about are the same. Just think about that. Okay. And then what happens at the SI joints? So we already talked about it relative to what the pubic bone's doing, but what do the SI joints do on their own? They're not dictated by that piece of cartilage in the front of the pelvis. They clearly have like a much greater role in the body than the pubic symphysis, just given the design and the location. So what do the SI joints do? What is their role in the body? What's their role in the body? Huh, what is that? What is that going on there? Anybody? I like that you're thinking about it.
Transmit force on a wider plane from the spine.
Transmit force from the spine onto a wider plane. What wider plane, Rhonda?
The sacrum
Yeah.
into the SI
Yeah.
joints into the hips.
Yep, all the way down the keystone. So the keystone on both sides, as we see by design, the keystone on both sides. Can you see in there?
Mm-hmm.
Keystone on both sides by design, that joint is pretty long, right? And we talked about the significance of the keystone structure and how it sits in the body. It is designed for an anchoring for the axial skeleton. So it's not that the spine necessarily goes down onto the sacrum. I don't want you guys to think about that. In fact, you should be reversing that with your people. We don't want the spine to be impacting down. We're not an accordion. So
But
that's
it's gravity.
and we should be opposing gravity, which we'll
Yes.
get to soft tissue. Just because it's gravity doesn't mean that we should accelerate that. We need to be opposing gravity in proper mechanics. Again, we'll get to that when we get to soft tissue. So I don't want you to think, oh yeah, the spine is just pummeling that sacrum. That's not what's happening. Don't think about it like that. That's not what's happening. But what is happening is that the sacrum's getting it from both ends, right? So it is the foundational base of the axial skeleton, and gravity is pulling down on that we're meant to be opposing functionally. And also the legs are coming up and into the sacrum, up and into the innominates, which articulate with the sacrum SI joint. So the sacrum's kind of getting it from both ends. The sacrum's, again, by design, it's meant to, it's okay. It's not faulty. The sacrum's meant to be the foundation for the axial skeleton and everything that rests above it, not punches down on it, but rests above it. And it's taking in impact as we're absorbing from the earth up into our extremities, which articulate in the innominates and immediately make up the other half of that joint, other half of the SI joint. So there's a dual emphasis, if you will, to the sacrum through the SI joints. The keystone sacrum sits down and in the pelvic bowl and is meant to be foundational to house the spine and axial skeleton to go up. And the sacrum sits wedged in between 2 bones that are giving it constant feedback and impact from the earth. Legs, innominates into the sacrum. You guys get it? Yeah. So it's tempting when you're looking at the sacrum to be like, oh my God, do I go all the way up to the head or do I go down to the big toe? Oh God, I'm never going to get it done. I only have 60 minutes. I get it. It's tempting to do that. One more time. I recommend you go back to the 3 bones of the pelvis first, because you can clear a lot of that up, whether it's coming in from the innominates or a resting place for the axial skeleton. Either way, if you balance out those SI joints as they sit inside the pelvis, you'll get a lot of leverage. It's one of the ways that I can work pretty simply and like create lots of results quickly. It shouldn't take 10 sessions for you. Just shouldn't. Anyway, different topic. The 3 bones of the pelvis and the 3 joints and how they work in the pelvis are important for us to know as a foundation so that we can start to see if one of them is awry. Let's do that. We're a little ahead of ourselves here, but why not? I think we're ready. How would you know if one of these joints was awry? How would you know? Cheryl?
Pain.
Yeah. Number 1, if the body is in alignment, the way we're designed, there's no pain. If we're moving our body through that designed alignment, there's no pain. So when we're all asking, well, my client has XYZ pain, what do I do about it? That's letting you know it's either out of alignment or not being used the way it's designed, or both. That's what you do about it. Go back to that and then use your tools to get them back. Gary?
What about a visual to look at the ilium to see if they're the same?
You could do that. I tend to find that the measurements of the ilium to be a bit inaccurate. You know, I went through lots of training, you know, just like you along the way. And I think the ilium measurements can be just distractingly incorrect because of how much soft tissue connects to them and what that soft tissue does. But yeah, anything that you do to create accuracy in measurements is what I recommend. We, of course, in the SHOTS method have our own measurements that I developed, and that's how I got the answers that I get. Use what you have to check those Lego blocks. They should be clicked together and then moving freely the way they're designed. Not out of those bounds. Okay, great. What other questions do you guys have? What other questions, you guys? Everybody here actually is in the Sacred Sacrum course, which is awesome. Does this feel like part 2 from last week?
A
For
little.
you? A little?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Love it. What other questions do you have for me today?
I am curious. On the sacrum, there's the little holes that appear. Is that where nerves go through?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what I thought, but yes.
We're going to get to nerves on training number 3. Beautiful. Looks like Joshua, you're coming in for a question. I will say this about nerves just for, because I always like to say more, not less. Nerves are happy when bones are aligned. So for those of us who've done a lot of training around nerve and nerve innervation, etc., absolutely. The more you can learn about the body, the better. I am not here to tell you don't learn that. I got feedback the other day like, oh, so you don't think the nerves are important? I never said that. I just said that you don't need to memorize all of them to affect them appropriately. And here's what I mean by that. Nerves are happy when bones are aligned and muscles are functioning optimally. So I don't need to know the name of a nerve to identify that there's something wrong with it. And what's wrong with it is probably nothing. I don't need to blame the nerve because it's giving sensation. I need to find out what the alignment is like in the axial skeleton, starting with the sacrum. And if I address that and resolve it, no nerve by any name will be symptomatic. So just want to make sure that that didn't get misconstrued again. Joshua, did you have a question? Looks like you were coming in with a cue. Hello.
Now, good morning.
Good morning.
What would you say the movement is at the pubic symphysis? You're saying it wasn't twisting, it wasn't torque. What would you call it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there probably is an anatomical term for that.
Okay, I just figured I'd ask just off the top.
Yeah, I don't think it's called a gliding joint. I think there's a term for it, actually, which is escaping me at the moment. Anybody else know who studied joints at one time? Yeah, I don't know, Joshua. Let me see if I can, well, maybe someone here can Google it. If I Google it, I'll start to look weird on camera, but Not that I care how I look. I'm just saying I want to still stay connected and present. It's a good question. It's a specific type of joint. I'll say this too about joints. For those of you who are in our academy and taking any anatomy courses, I took a ton of anatomy, you guys. I took like over a decade of anatomy through nursing programs, physical therapy programs, biomechanics, personal training. Like I took so much anatomy. And I have a brain of retention. Like I love all the information. And there's just some data points that were interesting to learn so that I could see it differently in my mind's eye. And I just didn't need to retain the name of it. And I know if I cared enough, I'd remember the name. I get that. Like I get it. I'm not saying my way is the only way. The point is, what mattered to me more than what it was called in some areas of the body, and Joshua, this pubic symphysis is one of those. What mattered to me more than a one-off name of something in the body was what was the implication of that? Why was that design different? What was it doing in the body? Because we're not static. Even as massage therapists, you know, our clients are typically laying there passively and we're doing all the work, or at least a large part of it. And it's just not how they got into pain anyway. So I needed to know what they were doing when they weren't on my table that brought them in the first place. And in order to know what they were doing that got them to come in with pain in the first place, I needed to understand how the parts worked more than the identification of them. And that really shined itself to me when I went back through school. You know, I changed states and licenses and things, and I went back to school and I knew the name of every muscle and their attachment points, and I still wasn't sure what they did. And I was like, this is not helping me. It's not helping me to know this beautiful little indentation on a bone and what it's called and the attachment point of that particular muscle and the, you know, percentage directional of the fibers. Fascinating stuff, by the way. Fascinating stuff. And it told me nothing about what was going wrong in that person's lunge or the way they were walking across the floor and causing pain. Knowing the names of some things didn't, after a while, I just stopped remembering them because what I really needed to know was how was it working? So again, I'm not saying don't know the name of it, Joshua. I'm not saying don't ask that question whatsoever. I'm letting you guys know why I don't know the names of some things. As somebody said, well, I thought you knew a lot of anatomy. I do. I don't know the names of everything all the time anymore. It's not what I teach. And it's not what I teach is what I know. And what I know is that the way someone moves and the way it moves when it goes wrong is my sweet spot. And there's no name for that. So maybe all that to say, maybe you found it by now, Joshua. You look like you were referencing, did you look it up? There should be a name for it. It's not a hinge joint.
I strongly suspect it's gliding, but I just stopped.
Yeah.
I stopped to listen to you.
Yeah.
Give you my full attention.
Oh, thanks. But I think
well, yeah, you bet.
Gliding is, what's that?
You bet.
Oh, you're sweet. I think gliding is specific to the wrist though. And again, I'm talking here because I'm searching for the answer. Rhonda, you're shaking your head no?
I've always learned it as gliding because it's a flat plate and the ilium slides over the sacrum.
Oh, pubic symphysis. What's that joint?
Oh, pubic symphysis.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's what exactly. Some of them we just don't know the name of, but that's okay. It might be named something. Here's what I love about the question though, Joshua. The fact that we're looking for a name means we're looking for more information about it. And as long as we stay curious about the body instead of arrogant like we know everything, then we'll always be able to stay curious about what's being presented. And that type of mind space really gets to be your habit when you're working with people with pain, because there is no cookie cutter way that they show up. You got to lean in and be curious. So if you're leaning in and like, well, what is this called? And what does that do? And how does that work with that other part? That's great. Stay in that mind space because you'll always solve the problem then if you stay in the question. Gary.
So I have it on whatever Google is.
Google. Who's Google?
Google.
Yeah. Who's the author?
The symphysis can move up to 2 millimeters and rotate up to 1 degree. Doesn't say all the movement. And let's see what else is. Yeah, there's a very technical thing, like it says the diastasis wider than 15 millimeters is considered a subdislocation. So
Right.
anything more than 15 millimeters is dislocated, but it doesn't really call it the movement. You
Right.
don't get the movement call.
Right. And here's the
Yeah.
other thing too, guys, was we're Googling. Google's not an author.
Mhm.
Google's a search engine. So
Right.
this was really interesting, you know, during the publishing era when everybody had a book instead of a business card. Anybody can write a book these days. That's awesome. Use your voice, share your wisdom far and wide, self-publish, do your jam for sure. Nobody's vetting that information anymore, guys. So Google's not the author. Google's a search engine. And when you click on an article on Google, you should look at who's the author. It could be a magazine editor who took a bunch of quotes from a bunch of experts and wrote an article that now you're confusing yourself with. Just be thoughtful about that. And if it's a podiatrist telling you something that they suspect is going on in the sacrum, but by law, they're not allowed to work above the knee, you should qualify that before you take in what you're reading in that article. So I'm not saying be suspicious of everything. I'm saying don't be gullible. Anybody can write anything these days. Who's the author? Ask yourself that. You're here with me for a reason. You've all vetted me for some whatever time it took you to vet me. You vetted me. You knew that I knew enough to give you enough reliable information that you decided to come back. You should do the same thing when you click on an article. You don't even know the author. Which is, that always cracks me up when folks will send me an email after a Tuesday train. Well, you said this and you said that. I'm like, do you do that on Google when you click on an arbitrary link and just read whatever you read and think it's true? You don't even know the author of that thing. So be mindful as we're clicking, you know, to look for I always scroll to the top who wrote it or scroll to the bottom who wrote it. Then what do they say? And then I'll do that 2 or 3 times. And so I recommend that you gather your information that way. Don't be too gullible. We want things quickly these days. Our attention span's very short. So just be mindful and responsible to yourself about that you might also be in one of those hasty moments where you're just expecting to click and get the answer. And that does not help you solve a problem when someone comes to you with pain. Pain, click, do is not how you're going to solve. You're not going to be effective that way. And I know you all want to be that way. That's why you're here. So practice being strategic in your thinking. Practice letting the anatomy give you information. Sit with that information and process what that means to you, and then apply it to the body in front of you. That's several steps. It doesn't take forever. You got to practice it and you'll get quicker at it. But it's not just click, point, check, go. So just be thoughtful about that as you're gathering information. You might not gather information in a way that helps you solve gathering information with a client. The way we do one thing is the way we do everything. Rhonda?
So I hit WebMD about pubic symphysis, and one of the things we haven't added in is that the pubic symphysis stretches in childbirth.
It does. Yep. And that doesn't happen to, I mean, it only happens to half the population, only women.
I understand.
But yes, it does allow for a movement for the innominates to move away from each other to deliver a baby. But that's a temporary period of time. It doesn't stay stretched out like that forever. And it's not part of optimal function. It's part of our majesticness of our human body. But day-to-day people walking around on the earth, that the pubic symphysis isn't stretching. And that said, if you are working with a woman who's had a child or multiple children, you probably want to keep that in mind, that her innominates, her Lego blocks were pulled apart and clicked back together and pulled apart and clicked back together 1, 2, 3, maybe more times. And I don't know, for those of you who've played with Legos, you can pull them apart and put them back together and they still stick, but there's that little dot on the bottom where they aren't quite lined up anymore. That could be what you're dealing with too. So think about that before like going after the adductors, for example. You know, oh, her adductors were so tight. I've heard people say that. Her IT band, she needed to really roll out her IT band. And what I'm hearing is, so the femur, as it sits in the hip socket, all the musculature around that joint action is symptomatic, but it's because of where the innominate was as the femur sat in it that was the problem. It's this that's the problem. This being the acetabulum and the innominate that goes with it. It's this that's the problem, not all these muscles down here that we're just going to keep foam rolling our faces off about. Be smart, guys. Be smart. Go back to the Lego blocks. Are they aligned? Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up for today? Nobody? No questions. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad that you guys were here asking thoughtful questions. Hopefully you feel really confident. Hey, Natasha, confident about your architecture and the connective points and how they work together. So that would be great. Natasha, did you pop on because you have a question? No, just so we could see your face?
Yes, I was commuting the whole time.
I saw you. Are you on the,
Yeah.
are you in New York?
No, I'm in Boston. Well, right now I'm in West Rockford in Boston.
Okay. It looked like you were on the subway, like the overground
I
subway in
know.
Upper Manhattan.
It's so loud on the bus and train. So I was like, I was hoping you guys didn't hear me at any point.
No, it was perfect. I'm glad we got to keep you company on your commute. That's great. All right, so that's our wrap up for today. Thank you all so much for being here. Did you guys get good value? Do you feel like you have more understanding and what to do about it? Okay, good. That makes me super happy. For those of you who are joining tomorrow's Sacred Sacrum, first of all, anybody who's here listening, because I know several of you have emailed me in the week, yes, you can still join, but come on, let's go. Come on, let's go. Because tomorrow we're going to workshop it out. We're workshopping out alignment of this pelvis and what to look for, what to do. And I'm going to give you 3 easy takeaways. You're going to practice it on your own body. I'm going to watch you do the whole thing. We're going to get feedback from each other. These workshopping sessions are super valuable. It's not just theory. It's like, oh, well, gosh, now I have a whole new perspective on this thing that I wrote down in my notebook, but now I have it in my body. Oh my gosh, now I know what to do with this, right? So that's what tomorrow's session is about. Please come. If you're on the fence, please come and join us. If you're even a little bit remotely interested in Sacred Sacrum, please join us because it's so fun. And it's the first time we've done it live in several years and probably for the last time for several years. So it's a good one. And I know most of you here are in that course. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And until next Tuesday, we'll be sacruming it out. And then if you have any requests for Tuesday training, let me know. I have pushed a few of them aside because I keep bringing in the sacrum. I might do that again next week. I don't know. But if you have any Tuesday training topics that you'd like us to cover, please send me those and we'll fit them into the schedule. Okay, my friends, until I see you next time, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing all of your information. Share the videos with your practitioner colleagues if you know that this would be of value to them. And thank you so much for the incredible work that you do in the world. I'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.